Hello, listeners. Today, Ravi and Jam speak with Mike Bryson about a key piece in the energy transition, the power grids. Mike is Senior Vice President of Operations at PJM, the biggest regional transmission operator in the United States by capacity, peak demand, and people served. PJM clears hundreds of billions of dollars annually across energy, capacity, and ancillary service markets. Mike collects an impressive background, combining executive positions in PJM for more than 30 years, with his 10 years of military experience, including a Bronze Star for combat service. Ravi, Jose, over to you.
Thank you, Ava, and welcome, Mike, to the Unlocking the Energy Trilemma podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jose.
So let us start, Mike, asking you the same question that we asked to all our speakers. Is please share with us a fact or figure related with the energy trilemma and with the topic today, grids and RTOs.
Sure. And what I'd like to just talk a little bit about with that factoid is the interconnection queue. There's been a lot of discussion about the interconnection queues across the entire United States. And particularly in PJM, we have already had more than 50 gigawatts that have cleared the queue. So they're ready for the next steps in getting on with getting built. And that's a pretty significant number, and a number I think we all should be paying attention to.
Excellent. So do you believe that the PJM's current capacity market structures and interconnection processes need to evolve to better support such additions or dispatchable resources, given that there is a growing and shifting demand patterns? Do you believe that there needs to be some evolution to that?
Yes, I think that all of these processes need some evolution going forward. So that's an easy answer to your question. But more specifically, if you look at capacity markets, we have been evolving the capacity markets to adapt to the mix and the pace of what's going on. I think one of the big things I'll point to in the capacity market evolution that really takes into consideration the transition is the ELCC, the effective load carrying capability, something we've introduced. And certainly there's been a lot of feedback about that, but I think it does a good job of reflecting the contribution and the growth of a lot of these resources in PJM. The queue as well, the interconnection queue. We went through a reform of the interconnection queue. I think those processes are showing to be very successful. The new FERC orders that are coming out about the queue are going to actually add some more evolution to that. Obviously, that's going to be under FERC compliance thing, but definitely evolution, I think, is an important part of our processes going forward.
And Mike, you've mentioned the gigawatts in the queue, but we have, or you have a forecast to retire by 2030 a lot of generation, around 40 gigawatts, which is about 20% of the current capacity. And the summer peak is going to increase a lot. So how do you foresee the grid and the generation sources in the years to come?
Yeah, and we've published a couple of updates about that. So it's on one side of the equation, we have retirements, and the retirements are based on policy. And some of that policy is evolving as well. And we're seeing some of it, certainly with the current administration. Some of it's based on economics. And we're also seeing that change a little bit based on some of the high capacity prices that you've seen. And so while we see a lot of retirements, we also see some of the announced retirements changing their mind. We see some planned retirements changing their mind. There's still some retirements out there, so we think it's still something we need to manage. On the flip side of that equation is the stuff that's coming in. As I mentioned, we still have a lot in the queue, but we have a lot that's has cleared the queue. And we also just introduced this concept and got a very positive FERC order called RRI. And the idea there is, are there some, we're going to call it near shovel ready projects that we can have some reliability attributes that we can get on the system much faster. And we got a lot of participation in that. So hopefully that's going to help with both sides of the equation. But in the middle is really what you mentioned, Jose, is load growth is exceeding what we've experienced probably in 20 years, largely due to data center, some due to onshore and just some residential load growth, but a lot of it obviously is due to the data center load growth.
And given the rising demand forecasts, are there any concerns about resource adequacy in the near future? Do you believe that some of these coal plants that were scheduled to retire perhaps may be called upon to run for a few more years to provide the grid reliability that you need?
Yeah, definitely resource adequacy. If you asked me what was the thing that keeps me up at night, resource adequacy over the next couple of years is really because we do have the balance of things are retiring faster than they're coming on board. And so we have to manage that. Now, we've been talking to generators that have plans to retire. We actually, you're probably familiar with some of the Talon units down in the Baltimore area, about 1,800 megawatts that we have asked to stay on for a couple of years while we get
Is that
transmission
Brandon
up.
Shores?
Brandon Shores
Brandon.
and Wagner.
Yeah.
They're in a particularly sensitive area of the system. It's right outside of DC and Baltimore. The Key Bridge is in that area. There's a lot of transmission work that needs to be done as well. We're definitely going to be working with resources. And also, you may see the Trump administration even push the coal in a direction to try to stay longer. I don't know that we're going to see any new coal anymore, but if we can just hold on to some of the coal a little bit longer till we get the renewables on the system and operating and some of this new generation, that would be good.
You've mentioned that data centers. PJM holds the largest concentration of data centers in the world, and it means 25% of national data center load, probably. How do you see their impact in the grid and the behind the meter supplies with data centers?
Sure. Like you said, data center load growth, we've been working with it for a couple of years now. It started very heavy in the Virginia area. We're seeing it probably in 5 or 6 concentrated areas across the PJM system, but still growing a lot in Virginia. And combination of things, getting transmission built to serve the load, if they're even without a resource adequacy issue, but in some places, there's not going to be enough generation to serve the load too. We've had a couple different models on the system, some of it a co-located load model, which I think most of the load is starting to see that maybe that's just a transitional model and not a long-term model. Because I think some of these data centers want to make sure they can run all the time, and they want to make sure they have pretty solid power. So the co-located load, I think, is definitely a transitional. We just filed recently with FERC or different models of co-located load that we think that we can work with a focus on this being transitional, because we think it's important that we actually have the transmission and the generation to serve this load in PJM reliably. And some of the things we talked about, I think, are going to help us be able to do that.
And are current load forecasting models adequately capturing the rapid growth and the continuous operating profiles associated with these new data centers and AI-related power demands?
It is one of the challenges that we're working with. Are we adequately capturing it? And so if you think about the load forecast, if you under forecast, you're going to create a reliability issue. If you over forecast, you're going to create stranded assets that customers are paying for. So it's really important that we are as close to accurate as possible. So we've been working with our transmission owners and with the data center coalition and all the different data centers to say, how do we get that model very accurate? And there's a lot of really valid reasons for why it can come in higher or lower. But what we would need to do is figure out what all those issues are and get really close to trying to be as precise as we can for that data center load out into the future. We definitely see it materializing down in the Dominion area, Virginia area. We've seen the load that we have forecast come onto the system, and that load is being served.
And Mike, if you see the capacity mix in PJM is still, say, quite fossil, let's say, plus nuclear, so it's very dispatchable. How do you foresee the entrance of renewables? Is just like a complement, or do you really think, despite of the new administration, that this is, let's say, this is going to be a replacement of these fossil fuels?
Yeah, I'm in the complement school of thought, which is I think we need all of it. I think that there's a lot of benefit to renewables. For one is the operating cost of renewables Obviously, the clean aspect of it is really important. So it helps with the sustainable and affordable piece of it. And I think for that reason, it's really important. But we just need to make sure that we have the right reliability attributes across all of the fleet. But we've been working on what do those reliability attributes look like. But things like reactive support, voltage support, frequency support, all those aspects that are really important for the grid just to operate reliably. And so I think what we're going to see is the amount of megawatts that are on the system available from an energy perspective will be much more than 100%. But the amount that we need for a peak is going to be closer to our load forecast plus our reserve. And so we'll have the ability to be able to operate during normal times with a lot of renewables, but we will have those other resources during stress times. And so then it's important that we make sure that our market price signals incent that other kind of generation to stay around and maybe run less, things like gas and oil, things like that.
Because it seems we forgot that the name of the game is really energy security.
Yes. That's true. Energy security is important. When we look at the peak days, there's not that many of them. There's more of them throughout the year. In the winter, we have one or two winter peak days. In the summer, we'll have one or two. During the shoulder months, when we take outages, and a good example is today. Today, we're sitting with, it's a little bit colder in PJM. It's for April unseasonably. So we're probably getting about 100,000 megawatt load. That's not an unreasonable load. But we have 60,000 megawatts of generation outages that are trying to do all the work that they need to do to be ready for the summer or winter. So all of a sudden, you're at summer peak operating conditions. And so you need to manage that all year round. And so having some of those gas resources and battery resources on the system are going to be really important.
Mhm. Mike, one of the things that we've been hearing from the market is the long lead times related to a lot of the natural gas capacity, primarily simple cycle and some combined cycle units that are scheduled to come online, coupled with higher interest rates, perhaps some permitting challenges, some long construction timelines. So how do you, and obviously you forecasted that some of these are going to impact our system load in the years to come. How do you keep track of ensuring that these announced projects will really happen and not get delayed any further? And what are typically the backup plans in case they get delayed or just fall off the radar?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it probably gets to my closing question too. But we got to make sure that we keep the stuff around we have now until the new stuff is on and operating. I think that's a really important principle. Is we have a lot of places where at the expectation of new resources, we've retired old resources. And then there's a gap of maybe a couple months, but in some cases, a couple years where the resources aren't there. The New Jersey offshore wind is a really good example. They put a lot of policies in place to get the offshore wind built, and they went all in. They committed to funding it, but then they put policies in place to retire thermal stuff. And now the offshore wind got canceled and the other stuff has left the system, and it puts you in a deficit. We have to make sure that we're keeping the legacy stuff around until the new stuff is operating and on the system. And that'll help us close that gap.
And Mike, California and Texas or ERCOT are collecting nearly 100% of the energy storage, battery energy storage in the US. How do you see PJM with energy storage, or particularly battery energy storage? Is this something that it will be helpful, another complement on the grid, or
It's
something?
storage will definitely be helpful. I think we have very low penetration of storage, a couple hundred megawatts. Most of it is in our regulation market. And frankly, it's because if you think about the cost of new entry, which is the foundation of our capacity market was, the last cleared price was $270 a megawatt day. The cap that we settled on with the Shapiro administration is about $325 a megawatt day. Cost of new entry for a battery is upwards of $600 a megawatt day. So there's a disconnect there. And that disconnect may have to be filled by state policies or state funding of some of those resources. And then there's also a gap that we've heard about the way you operate and run batteries on the system. And so both of those pieces we're taking a look at is what are the things that we may be able to do to either help states get batteries on the system, knowing that maybe the capacity market isn't going to fully fund those projects, and help them be able to operate in a way that they're confident they can make up their costs in our markets.
Excellent. And do you see, if you were to look back 12 months and compare today's market scenario from what it was 12 months ago, what do you think is the biggest change, both in terms of market requirements and perhaps policy?
Wow, in 12 months is a huge amount of time if you think about what's happened in the last year. For one, we have an administration now that just had a 180-degree different philosophy about resources, the type of resources, and the focus of the trilemma. If you think about their focus more on reliability and affordability and less on sustainability, and that was different 12 months ago. The other thing in PJM, we saw a high capacity market clearing, which is very indicative of the supply demand problem that we've been talking about. And those may be two big things that we've seen that certainly have changed where I'm sitting today versus where I was last April. It's just significantly different.
Fantastic, Mike. So last question, as the same as we do with all our speakers. If you had a magic wand and you can try to unlock the energy trilemma with that wand, what would you ask?
Yeah, I think it gets back to the battery storage or some kind of storage, whether it's battery storage, even pumped storage, hydro, which is a great resource as well, is that I could say, okay, every state, you got to have X amount of megawatts and put that in the state, and we just figure out how to fund it. That would be my magic wand.
Fantastic. I think it's achievable. At least it is achievable.
Yes.
Okay. Mike, thank you very much for your participation. And we'll follow all the news on PJM that are coming this year that seems very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to interesting times. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes.
We hope you liked this conversation. Follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe for free to the podcast on the platform of your choice, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, or Apple. Because in the next episode, Ravi and Jam will speak with another expert in the industry to unlock the energy trilemma.